We are live in 3, 2, 1. We made it. Denny, we made it, my man. How you doing today?
Good. Thanks for having me on. Appreciate it.
Absolutely. So I do want to jump right into it. For everyone in the chat who doesn't know, you should know. Denny is the CEO of Cloudhead Games. Pistol Whip, everyone knows that. Aperture Hand Labs, the Gallery. And lately, I think I kind of reached out for the first time. You've been kind of all around Reddit, Twitter, Upload VR for a lot of comments you've been doing lately, but those comments, they hold weight. Unlike an armchair dev like myself, you have quite a bit of skin in the game, and your words hold a lot of weight and a lot of respect for putting yourself out there. You seem to have a really good finger on the pulse of what gamers want, but you equally have the knowledge and the finger on the pulse of what is acceptable and doable now. But you seem to be frustrated, might be putting words in your mouth. I don't want to say that. But much more vocal about this big game discussion, Half-Life Alyx continuously on repeat. Is there something going on lately that has made you want to be a little more vocal and bring us back to maybe a grounded reality?
Yeah, I think I've always said, like over the last 8 years, it's always been a struggle for VR studios to gain any kind of meaningful funding to do anything big. And there's some obvious reasons for that. It's the economy of scale. It's not a big market. It's still not a big market. It's getting much bigger and it's becoming a lot more stable. And we're one of the small handful of studios that's actually done well recently, mostly because of Quest 2. So I guess the frustration is more around the kind of ire and spite and anger from the consumers who are looking for the next big Half-Life Alyx, and every earnest game studio that's doing VR pours their blood, sweat, and tears into this small thing that they can afford to build, and everybody kind of dumps on it because it's not Half-Life Alyx. But it's super important to understand that to earn Half-Life Alyx kind of money, you have to have Half-Life Alyx kind of production budgets, and no one does. Only Valve has Half-Life Alyx production budgets. And VR OEMs, the people making the hardware, have, depending on the time of year, you'll get different amounts from them for different things, but the pitch process is difficult, and you've got to get just the right thing. But it's important to recognize, I guess, that this is all a risk reward thing for small studios or medium-sized studios. Cloudhead Games is a 30-person studio, which is pretty big for VR, like, because there's not that many. But and we dump almost all of our money is in paying our employees industry standard rates to work on Pistol Whip primarily. And it's not just the production staff, it's everything, all the other people you have to hire to support those people. So it's HR and management and finance and somebody dealing with hardware issues, and like the bigger you get, the more complicated that puzzle becomes. But I just wanted to give some perspective, because people might look at Pistol Whip as a smaller game, but to support that small thing, to keep pumping out content and to support the community and all that stuff, it's still a 30-person studio doing that small thing. So take a Half-Life Alyx and multiply that by 10. That's the kind of budgets you're talking about, and that's well out of reach of almost everybody. Like, just hands down, it just doesn't happen. So
when it comes to this the ability where you need, I mean, I'm with you all the way. Pistol Whip seems like that game, the forever game that is going to get you closer and closer to getting to those. But I don't know, I might have misread this tweet, but it seems like Cloudhead Games, it's not just the projects we see. It's not just the gallery. It's not just Aperture Hand Lab and Pistol Whip. There is a catalog, a war chest of games like Pistol Whip try to fund, that may be greenlit. You mentioned some other big IPs that could have been almost greenlit. I wasn't sure if you were referring to Cloudhead Games endeavors, or if that was just a general statement across the board.
I think that comes from two perspectives, our own, because there's been a number of near misses, I guess I'll call them. But it's just like talking to our peers over the years. Everybody's got those stories about big IP, or bordering on triple A style games, deep graphics and great gameplay and big teams. So yeah, the near misses are a kind of a frustration, but an understandable one in a weird way, because how can I speak to this without saying things? But like,
You could just say things.
essentially, like, there have been many times with our studio, with other studios, where you've almost had complete buy-in on an IP that makes total sense for the medium, and it's VR centric, and it's an IP that just fits. It makes sense for VR. And often that falls down when you start negotiating IP rights and the amount of money, a game IP or a Hollywood IP might want to use that IP. That always tends to fall down, because then you get into the actual economics of, well, how big is the VR market? How many headsets exist? And when you explain that to those IP holders, they're like, well, that's just not enough money. Or this isn't a big enough audience, or it's just kind of not worth it, right? So that is often the discussion. And I think things are starting to soften there because of the relative success of VR since 2019 and we've kind of done the hockey stick thing, where now it's really, kind of booming in a way. So I think some of those doors will open up again very slowly, but there's been, I guess the thing is, it was always a chicken before the egg conversation with the people making the hardware. It's like, guys, the only way we're really going to catapult the hardware is if we have awesome software that isn't just a small experience that a dev can safely afford, because it's always a risk mitigation thing for your small studio. You're paying these people, they have kids and they have car payments and mortgages, and you can't take big risks. You got to take the conservative, responsible path, right? But trying to get buy-in from the OEMs to say, like, you need this stable of games to really drive hardware sales. It doesn't, and even if you go further back with, just game console launches, it was pretty typical to launch a new game console, an Xbox or PlayStation, whatever, and for those companies to pay outright for content with the launch of the hardware. So there was a bit of a weird disconnect, I think, early on with that, and there was a trickle of money, and different companies did give certain amounts of money, but it was always never quite enough to like do the big thing. So
Absolutely.
you had a lot of studios like ours, like in 2018, we could have released a big thing, but we just didn't have the resources to do that. But that story is like endemic. Every VR studio that's stuck around this long will
Are
tell
you
you a
able
story
to
like that.
are you able to share what that might have been in 2018?
No, I wouldn't, because that could still happen. Like I said, the things are softening up, so there's possibilities around a whole bunch of things. So the VR market of today is still, it's kind of like trying to filter out the things that kind of went wrong, and everybody's switching their mindset right now to go, oh, okay, VR is actually taking off now. All the promise of the Gartner hype cycle thing that everybody talked about, VR is actually now starting to do the thing, and it's provable. Like, our studio has, a X number behind it because we've profited from the success of the platform. So now it's a provable thing, but everybody's sort of having to switch their old baggage, they get it out of there so that they can get their heads around this. And that includes the OEMs, the hardware makers, and studios who are building content.
Can we dive into, since it's going to be, I feel like you would agree, it's going to be circular logic if we just talk about when's the next big Half-Life Alyx game. It's going to come when the money's there, honestly. But for everyone else who does not have the means to make that, one reason I really enjoyed the discussion you brought up on twin stick locomotion wasn't specifically because about the twin stick, about the locomotion. But it seemed like where people picked up, I feel like a lot of that people just picked up saying, no, twin stick works. That's what I'm used to. It really wasn't about twin stick locomotion. It was about, in my mind, what are you doing to compensate where you can't hit that production, but you can bring in mechanics that may feel or give the feeling of a production like that. Maybe I read into that wrong, but I'm curious what your thoughts are on what these path to lazy mechanics or path to just the easier road taken? Should we be doing more mainstream mechanics that are specific to only VR?
Yeah, a lot of that comes from just recognizing that there are so many different ways to approach locomotion that haven't even been explored properly in VR. And again, some of this comes back to studios taking safe bets because that's all they can afford to do. They have they'll go through the top 10 of what's working in 2D flat screen gaming and go, okay, we're going to make that thing for VR. Because they don't have the time and the budget to properly explore how they would do that in a unique way in VR, they end up falling on old 2D tropes. It's thumbstick and button presses and blah 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 blah. And I guess my point was there are so many different ways to handle that. Just a recognition that there are so many different ways to potentially handle those traditional locomotion schemes, but in a very VR centric way. But again, it's mostly because those studios don't have the time or a little labs division to find that answer before they run out of money.
Yes. And there's a lot of small, like, I know it's not the twin stick, but there's a lot of small things that I experience every now and then in VR that I would have never thought would lead to immersion. And I'm not sure how others would think of this stuff. So, for example, I was in a theater production in VR chat the other day. I can't really talk much about that, but I was in it. And one simple thing I never thought of that added to the enjoyment of it was the scale of characters. Characters who were supposed to be my parents were much larger than me. And
Mm-hmm.
where that seems trivial when I think about it, in the actual act of it, having to look up at who I'm speaking with is a dynamic that I never think of on how a child views parents.
Mm-hmm.
Just the act of looking up had an authoritative persona. I immediately
Yeah.
had to listen. I had more respect. Never thought about that kind of mechanic, but there's these really small things that I can't imagine budget wise would destroy you, but it gives one hell of an illusion that this is a higher production piece because it's something that changes your entire perspective of how you view reality.
Yeah. Designing for the medium is something we don't see happening often enough. It's more like people have some of this speaks to how small VR is in terms of the studios putting resources there because I've heard this story many times. People come into VR because they had an idea, but they had zero experience with game development or zero experience in the medium. So they came in with good intentions, but their idea didn't really fit the medium. And what I see happening, or kind of the best examples or the best experiences that really take advantage of the medium, it's usually from studios who have had to kind of fight and claw their way through building shitty stuff. So that, and then they find those answers, right? But a lot of VR content seems to be coming from people who are new to the medium and had a idea they thought would fit, but ultimately it doesn't. It's not sticky, doesn't feel good, isn't really taking advantage of the things that make VR so unique. So I
Yeah.
think that's kind of what you're saying.
In a way, yeah. I mean, your games, not to toot your guys' horn here, but I think the first game I didn't play the gallery until much later, but Aperture Hand Labs was probably was the first introduction to anything by Cloudhead Games, and it's undeniable the difference of what makes that sticky. I mean, how long is Aperture Hand Labs? Maybe like 20 minutes ish.
It depends how quickly you do it. Yeah, it's not even 20 minutes.
Yeah, it's how long you make it in a way on that one,
Mhm.
depending on how much you want to mess around with hand tracking. But why do I remember that 20 minutes where there's other games that I don't remember? It's those sticky little things. Pistol Whip, I think other people might say for different reasons. That was sticky to me because you guys really worked on building a community for a very long time pre-launch. Um, many people felt like they had helped build that game, which I think is really important. There are games out there that just launched. I have no problem dropping names. I'll give two games that I've played recently that had entirely different launches and entirely different stickiness. Cards and Tankards, which is just side quest only. It is coming to App Lab, and Larcenauts. Larcenauts was
Mhm.
vastly superior technical game. Everything about that game is a higher production quality, but my stickiness to it does not feel remotely like it does Cards of Tankards, who I have been in their Discord for a while. The dev should be working on his game, but instead is talking to everyone continuously,
Mhm.
and I remember that. Something
Yeah.
about that game feels sticky, even though itself I can't say is better. Um, but
Yeah.
there's something about I think right now you have to have that community in VR to really succeed. And that might be a little off topic and a tangent to what we talked about, but
Well,
that's just something I've noticed.
it's not in a way, maybe in an important way, because the origins of Pistol Whip came out of a number of things, like recognizing how big the VR market was, the attachable market, which was small. How big of a budget could we form around that thing? And then what is a very VR centric mechanic that everybody will understand immediately? And we've talked about this a lot, but it's more like it's driving the survival instinct or the reptilian brain more than anything else. Like you almost don't need to be taught what pistol whip is, because you're just going to move in a very natural survival way. And that the whole core of the game was built around that. How do we make people feel cool and look cool, but how do we kind of force them to behave in a way they don't have to think about? And that whole thing is the exploration more studios should be thinking about. VR is primal that way. It's keying into your main sensory organs in your body, and so you should be building around that, and kind of throwing away the things that you've learned from playing flat screen games. I'm pretty stubborn about that, because there's many really interesting solutions to how to approach game design in VR, and we don't see enough good stuff coming out. But at the same time, I totally get why people think certain things will work, even though they don't.
Well, we just, I think that comes from a lot of armchair devs like myself who we just have so much experience in other areas that we think translate when they don't. But yeah, I mean, giving people the ability to understand your game just intrinsically. Like I watched, oh man, who was it? Was it LS Toast who just did a pistol whip like quick video where he is literally spinning 360s and acting
Oh
a
yeah.
fool? I mean, that was beautiful. That
Yeah.
itself, it didn't look like he was playing a game. It looked like he was just being himself, and the game
Hmm.
conformed to him rather
That's
than
right.
he conformed to the game. And I think that's why games like Boneworks, a lot of people love that. The game's conforming to you. I want to play it
Yes.
this way, and the game said, okay, like guide me, take me to your end goal. And Pistol Whip can do that. Beat Saber does that. Boneworks does that. It's not you're not playing the game. The game almost is just saying, we understand you. Take us to the finish line. How do you want to get there? And it was kind of beautiful
Yeah.
when I watched that video.
What's I guess funny and interesting about that is, like, we fought so hard for so many years to get people into the idea that VR was a physical medium. That's really, it's one of the key takeaways. Yet there's a whole other conversation about accessibility and, making sure you're supporting seated and people who have issues that don't let them move. But VR is at its core a physical medium, even if it's just moving your head around. You're physically your body is the controller, and that's the area that I think needs to be keyed into by the developer community at large, because the most successful things tend to have that outlook. When we started way long time ago, we had the Oculus Rift 3 DOF and no 6 DOF, no room tracking, nothing like that. We ended up, as a studio, we ended up getting the Six Sense controllers to act as a kind of surrogate six DOF system, because we believe so strongly that VR required you to move. Like, that's
Hmm.
where the magic was. Just looking around is good. That's one step, but you really need to move. And there was this weird thing in the early part of the industry, like the first 3 years or so, where there was this big struggle between 180 seated experiences and no, stand up and move your body, like move around. That's where the magic is. That's where deep presence is. And so there was this kind of odd push and pull there. And it wasn't as deeply supported until Valve and HTC started promoting their room scale thing, and just the possibilities for your meat space body controller to do things in VR. That's what's exciting about VR, and I think everybody knows that now, but it wasn't actually clearly defined back then. But we're still kind of fighting against that in a weird way. I still see VR titles coming out that are like, yeah, you could. I mean, you can play that in VR, but is it fun? Is it taking advantage of the medium in a way that's sticky and fun? Usually, the answer is no. Unfortunately,
That's kind of what I took from that tweet about the twin stick locomotion. It wasn't about the locomotion. It was about how are we making anything sticky that you're doing in VR? Um, Going back to the motion, I mean, I know a lot of people use Pistol Whip for fitness. I know Jeff Bull Jr.'s in here, Black Box VR. Um, VR fitness is getting bigger. I don't think we're there quite yet. Hardware wise, doesn't really work for it.
Yeah.
But when you guys were making Pistol Whip, I'm kind of curious on the fitness aspect. Did you expect people to use this for fitness? Was there anything, game design wise that you factored into that, or was that completely just not even in the picture? Which, if it isn't, understood.
What's hilarious about that is that because we were so headlong into production, by the time we got to alpha tests with people who were outside the studio to test things out, the whole studio forgot that, oh yeah, Pistol Whip hurts your legs if you haven't played Pistol Whip. And when we had people in and had them testing, they were having tons of fun, but then we would get the next day complaints about, oh my God, I can't even walk down the stairs today. And so the fitness thing, no, it wasn't a top of mind thing at all. But in a way it was, only because one of the pillars for Pistol Whip was to make you kind of feel like John Wick and to take on that very physical, to force players to behave in that way physically. So we knew it was going to be physically taxing, but we definitely weren't targeting the fitness crowd. And it was just kind of like a amazing side benefit of doing the thing. And but what evolved out of that, which is really great, is that it turned out to be an excellent way to prove to people that you can trick people into exercising. And I think tricking people into exercising is the key to getting a lot of people really healthy, because exercise sucks. I mean, for many people, it's boring. Even when you try to stretch outside your bounds and do some kind of fitness activity, it's still not fun for a lot of people. So if you can trick people into moving their bodies and exercising without them knowing they're doing it, it's kind of like the best win ever.
If we get in, I won't go too hard on this, because if you get me into fitness, like, I will go forever. But the first time I heard about Pistol Whip and hurting legs, I literally had the squint. Like, I had to squint the screen. There's no way. I thought that was hilarious, because you would never think of a game like Pistol Whip affecting your legs, but it definitely did. But I'm fully with you that you need to make fitness fun in a way that you don't even notice it. I had a discussion with one of my employees today. It's like you pass by a gym. What's always at the window? The treadmills. Who likes a treadmill? Nobody.
No one.
It's literally a reminder when you drive by, like, no, I don't want to go. VR has the ability, though, to not even make you realize you're working out. But that's neither here or there. Go ahead.
Yeah, you brought up another thing, though, that is super relevant. It's the whole, I think the next kind of wave of VR products is going to, someone is going to crack the kind of outside in body tracking issue, because that is key. It's not just key for fitness, it's key for VR presence in general. Digitizing your full body and injecting that into the game, into the experience, whatever, is so critical, I think, in our next kind of stage of VR development. So as soon as that tech is silent, like the important thing here is that I don't believe tracking pucks are the answer to that. That's a kind of friction that is going to scare most consumers away. If it takes more time to get into VR, like, okay, I got to put on my roller skates to get into VR. That's one thing. But, if I'm having to get into an entire body rig to be in VR, a lot of people are just going to nope out right away. So body tracking is going to have to come from an outside in perspective that's super easy to set up, and you do it once and you forget about it, but you are fully mapped in VR. I think that's really intriguing to me, and there's so many things everyone could do with that. And I can't wait for that to eventually happen, whenever it happens.
From a developer's perspective, because when I think about full body tracking, I'm probably thinking lowbrow. Like, I'm just thinking VR chat, looking in the mirrors, blade and sorcery, kicking someone. Like, that is immensely enjoyable to feel that. But from a developer standpoint, what are some of the things that full body tracking would be able to bring to titles from Cloudhead Games? Is there anything specific that maybe we don't hear about a lot?
Well, it's just, you only have to go back not very far to realize how many things developers have come up with just using your hands, like gross physical motion with your hands. move down a few feet and look at your feet. There are so many mechanics you could build out of moving your feet. There's so many things that can happen on the floor that you can interact with your feet, that I don't know, that question is actually hard to answer because there's so many things you could do. It's just, we need that technology can't come from a third party. It can't be somebody making a tracking device that does blah blah blah. It has to come from one of the major OEMs. That's the only way it makes sense for developers to put any resources into developing for the thing. It has to have a big enough install base in the first place, otherwise we're not going to touch it.
That makes sense. Hard transition. You ready? Hard
Mm-hmm.
transition. So you brought up earlier, obviously, a lot of the success of Pistol Whip has come from the Quest platform, which makes sense. The game is fine tuned to demand freedom from wires, freedom to move and be yourself in it. Um, from someone who's on the Oculus platform, and also bringing up a lot of the other OEMs, or using that term. Um, I'm not trying. No anti-Facebook comment. More, what are you looking for as a developer from a future OEM? We talk. A lot of people always say we want competitors. We want competitors. I know what a competitor means to a consumer, but for a developer, what's the value add? What does a developer need to see from a competitor to be valuable? Because ultimately, we need content on a competitor, and that's going to come from a developer like yourself.
Yeah, well, I mean, most developers are in between a rock and a hard place that way, because without giving numbers, Oculus, without, let me put it this way, without the Quest, there is no serviceable VR market. Like, full stop. We the percentages, and we've broken this down many different ways. Yes, you can develop for Steam. Yes, you can develop for HTC or like those markets. But those markets are fractional. Like, you could be it, so this is what starts affecting and influencing the size of the team that you can then build the size of the product.
Hmm.
So for people who are like staunchly against Facebook being the dominant force in the market, they have a very small wedge to service. And it means that their games also have to be quite a bit smaller because they can only sustain a small group of developers to do that thing. And this is a problem because what it ends up turning out is small experiences that a lot of people are just not satisfied by. And it's kind of like a self-recurrent issue.
Hmm.
Um, so, if you have political leanings against Facebook, of course that's, a difficult prospect for you. Okay, well, without Quest, there is no market. And so there, and I'll also mention Sony, but Sony, had a big serviceable market, but the retention went way down way fast. So, and whatever happens with the next version of PlayStation PSVR 2 is changes the market again. But right now, there's the Quest 2 dominate the market in such a total way that to ignore it as a developer, especially if your studio is over 3 people, is a bit irresponsible. You have to look at that. You have to be realistic about who's propping up the market, who's pushing the most money in. I get that people want a competing product to the Quest and to what Facebook is doing, but you also have to recognize that they're selling headsets at a loss and I think that everybody kind of knows that.
Yeah.
Every single headset they sell, they lose a few $100s to the sale of that headset just to get that tech in your hands. No one can compete with that. No one, not HTC, not anybody, not Valve. Like, no one can compete with that. So you really have to consider that. Like, even as a enthusiast and a hobbyist, you have to go, okay, well, that's kind of the market reality of it. I competition is always good, don't get me wrong, and I'm not defending anybody here. I'm just
Yes. Hmm.
saying that this is the reality. So you have to look at the reality.
So yeah. Oh man, I obviously I don't disagree with any of that. My thought is that I hear people say I want a competitor, this and that. Is there anything a competitor can do from a developer's mindset that would entice developers to put forward the effort on a device that I don't think anyone else is going to come selling at a loss? So they're going to have to come with some other type of benefit to attract developers to build content for their platforms. For example, correct me if I'm wrong, armchair in here. I don't think there's much incentives for a developer right now to make a game for Steam VR. There's no visibility. Your player base is going to be a fraction of what it is for the Quest. could a competitor come and make such a visible storefront that may entice a developer to build for a platform that would only have a fraction of the audience of a Quest, but the visibility would be much better than, say, Steam VR?
Yeah, that's a super interesting question because it kind of ties into storefronts in general. Like, so right now, obviously, the two competing storefronts that kind of count in this scenario are Steam VR, and the Oculus storefront, and how those things are curated is really fascinating. So Oculus leans heavily on curation, as everybody knows.
Mm-hmm.
They curate they kind of put the best things they can in front of people so that it gives VR first timers the best possible experience they can get to get them hooked on the technology, keep them buying, keep them playing. That's their strategy, and it works. You can't argue with the numbers. It's working. On the Steam side, you have so on the Oculus side, you have it's kind of like a churn of the same developers doing really well there, right? Part of that is curation. Part of it is legitimately because those games are good.
Mm-hmm.
Um, go and then you have App Labs, which is kind of hidden and sectioned off in a weird way, right? Go to the Steam side, you have kind of the opposite but same problem. You have 10 or so of the same developers turning in the top 10 list of bestsellers all the time. It's curated by consumers, but it still has a weird filter that sort of highlights the things that have always been working.
Yes.
Sorry, phones are in here.
Actually, well, I'm going to pull, keep going. It
Yeah,
might mess up the
yeah,
screen for a second, but I'm actually, while you're talking, going to pull up kind of the top Steam VR stuff. I'm just curious to look at that while you're
yeah.
talking.
If you kind of follow it for a month, go look every day, you'll see the same kind of turn of the same product. So on Steam, the problem is if I'm a new developer and I built a new game for Steam, I drop it on Steam. Guess what? It gets buried by the same 10 developers. It always
Mm-hmm.
gets buried by. Same problem, different, like inverted strategy. So I really believe that both of those stores would highly benefit from kind of doing a bit of both in both places. Like Oculus should really have here's our top 10 curated things for first time users. Do this and you're guaranteed to be hooked on VR. Below that, there's a fan or consumer curated list of things that people like, right? And so you're getting both aggregates. I believe the same thing on Steam because we're VR is still in a tender spot. Like we're still trying to get people onboarded. And I think Steam would also benefit from here is the top 10 things we think you should play first if you're new to VR, because this is going to make the biggest impact on you and keep you putting money into the system. And then there's also the fan curated list of things that people like. Like, just represent both. To me, it seems like a simple solution to a complicated problem. And I'm sorry, that was a tangent from what you just said.
No,
The
no, go ahead.
the incentives, like for it, like company that has the capability to do that at scale, maybe Epic. If they pushed on the VR side harder and they did other things there, that could be one. But what are the incentives? They basically an OEM or a storefront would have to pay the developer a premium for being there because they can't compete with what exists already. Is kind of the bottom line,
I'm
I think.
just sent. I'm sending. I am listening to you. I apologize. I'm sending a quick. We lost connection for 1 second there, but we're back. It was very quick, so no one missed any of that. But no, that is I actually never thought of that. I really like the curated, because that's the difference. So if you ask your friends, what's your top 10? It is usually 50% plus different than what the top sellers are.
Yeah.
That's a really good idea. On
And
semi of
that
its
what you
go
just
ahead.
keyed in on there is exactly that. It's because a lot of this is still a bit grassrootsy, especially on the Steam side. People are recommending the same things over and over again. So that's also part of why the turn is happening the
What
way
you're
it
saying
is.
is they're recommending Half-Life Alex, and Half-Life Alex, right?
Beat Saber, super
Yeah.
hot, super hot, super hot.
It's been like that for a while. They should be recommending, but I actually want to dive into this just briefly, and this might only apply to like two people in the chat. I don't mean that disrespectfully, but PCVR has not gotten exactly a lot of love recently. What we talked about it briefly pre-stream, and I brought up that AMA that you did on Reddit in 2020. What would it take for the gallery to get a third episode to get some more attention, to get revisited. I understand why you don't. At least I think I do. I could be just completely off kilter. But is there anything that could get us back to PCVR for you guys?
Yeah, I'm not anti PCVR, by the way.
Oh, no, no,
Just
no,
to make
didn't mean that way.
that clear.
Yeah.
I Cloudhead is very VR agnostic. I should probably say that because I take heat sometimes for offering alternative perceptions of the market. But we are an agnostic VR studio. We believe in VR is what we believe in, and we want all markets to succeed. So what it would take is, I don't know, it's kind of the path we're on a little bit. We've enjoyed some success, starting to go on 2 years finally after 8 years of struggle, and we're finally in a position where we can hire more and we can do the things we wanted to do always. But it's always going to be like looking at the market where it lives right now. What's working? What are the percentages? Like when we launched the gallery, it was under this assumption that the first thing people would want to play is a Myst-like game in VR. That was my assumption. Mm-hmm. And my assumption was wrong, super wrong. That's a percentage did want to play that, but most people just wanted to shoot stuff. It's kind of the same old in some weird ways. But the what we learned out of all of that with the 2 episodes of the gallery, Call of the Starseed, Heart of the Emberstone, was that basically all you have to do is overlay what's happening in the 2D market on top of the VR market percentages. So
and Denny,
there's a
real quick.
Yes.
Just I was thinking about it. I think my base, there's a lot of Quest users. For those who don't know the gallery, could you give them like a super quick TLDR so they kind of know what we're talking about?
Yeah. So it was 2016 we launched Call of the Starseed, and so Call of the Starseed and its sequel Heart of the Emberstone were kind of like a Indiana Jones meets the Goonies-esque kind of adventure puzzle solving story. And the idea was, we wanted to put people in the center of an action movie, make them kind of feel like they're the main character in Goonies or something, through a story that's evolving. So you're trying to find your lost sister, and she was kidnapped by this nefarious being from another world, essentially. I won't say more than that, but it was, for us, it was an exercise in, well, what's the best thing we can build for the launch of VR? Because this was bundled with the HTC Vive at launch. So we wanted to give people kind of the best experience in terms of presence. Like what's the kind of environmental storytelling we can create to make people feel like they really transported somewhere else? That was kind of the heart of the thing, right? I think that sums it up.
Yeah, I think that sums it up pretty well. It was because I think it was definitely on Viveport at the time, and my first headset was an HTC Vive. And Viveport, which isn't talked about nearly enough, is a great deal. And that was where I was able to first be introduced to Cloudhead games, which was a great experience. I do want to just go backwards a little bit. I should have asked at the time, but from a developer standpoint, I think it's an endless cycle on Twitter or social media, the curation versus open platform. From someone who's on both storefronts, you probably have an interesting perspective on what's working, what's not. Do you have any opinion to share on the curation versus open storefront debate?
Yes.
What may be advantageous to each? Yes, I see you're smiling already.
My very strong opinion, I've already kind of said this, but my very strong opinion is that VR needs strong curation. It needs it because there is such a density of things being thrown out there, and a lot of them are not great first-time experiences. And the problem is that if you throw somebody into their very first VR experience and anything about that rubs them the wrong way, they get a little bit nauseous or they're dizzy because the movement is weird or the interaction is off, that's the first and last time they will ever pick up a headset. I've seen this happen over and over again, and it's just kind of a truth of VR. VR is a special flower that way compared to 2D. People can play a bad game in 2D and come back and play a good game in 2D. They're not going to walk away from the platform entirely. That is not true with VR. If they have a shitty experience, they're not going to, they think they've done VR and it was a waste of time and it made them feel sick. And so curation is vital for VR. But like I said before, curation is great, and have those top 10, 20 experiences, point people in the right direction, get them on a good path, but also offer them the kind of advanced user, um, democratically curated side channel. Like they should both coexist, is my answer to that.
Would if Oculus, I'll just use Oculus as an example, but it could be any platform, but I think Oculus would be the first one to try it, or maybe a competitor. Curation could also come in the form of said platform's version of Viveport, like an Xbox Live Game Pass. Some of the comments, I will call you out by name if I can find you again. Jeff Messer. Would a Viveport Xbox Game Pass type system work very well for maybe a competitor coming in? Or if Oculus did something like that, would that be game over for everyone else? Let's
The
just be
problem
honest.
with the problem with Game Pass, I kind of relate this stuff a bit to Netflix.
Sure.
Same kind of thing. You get an unlimited bucket of content for a monthly fee, right? That works on Netflix because they have hundreds of millions of subscribers. That's not true in VR. So I have a real problem actually with these models. It's too early to put that kind of model in place, and the reason why is you would have to pay developers an excess licensing fee to even get their stuff on the platform to make it worth their time. Because all it's really doing is kind of screwing over developers. Like they're getting pennies on the dollar for a game that they should be charging $60 for. Like, and I'm saying this again, it's just related to the scale of the market. The market is not big enough to actually treat developers fairly.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
All right, let's just get into it. I've been kind of holding off for a little bit. Let's talk about ads in VR because you knew that was coming.
Yeah. Let's talk about that.
I want to be very deliberate and kind of separating because there's like you can't just say, "Do you like ads? Yes or no." That question does not work in my opinion. There's a lot of areas. So let's start with just base standard non-targeted ads. When it comes to a developer, I kind of have two questions. One is, what are your thoughts on, we'll just say, standard non-targeted ads, them made into the game? But B, if you can elaborate, this kind of gets into financials. Do you see ads in VR as a feasible financial alternative to help developers, or is this pennies on the dollar, more or less?
Hmm. Yeah, as with everybody else, I've been paying close attention to the ad thing. My feeling on it is this: Hollywood does a great job with advertising, and the way they do it is you don't know you're being advertised to. That's the key. In VR, we have this opportunity to treat the model more like that. So if I can pick up a can of Coke in VR and interact with it and look at it, that's how you advertise to somebody in VR. Like it's product placement is really what it is. It doesn't matter if I'm in the future, then it's a futuristic can of Coke, whatever. It's ingrained into the environment in a way that is seamless, so that you don't know you're being advertised to. Sticking an ad or a billboard into a VR experience is not the way to handle this. If we are going to advertise at all, those things need to, basically what I would love to see is Nike approaches a VR developer and says, "Hey, look, can you make sure the character is wearing Nikes? We'll pay you X." That's how it should be handled, right?
Mm-hmm.
Not, here's a billboard with a picture of Nikes. I'm going to click on that and it's going to take me to a website. That's not how you do it. In my opinion, that is not how you do this successfully. Whether or not you should be advertised to in the first place for a game that you paid is a whole kind of other conversation. I think that the banner ad style of doing that is, I get why Facebook would want to do this to recoup in different ways, but I feel like they should only be touching their own home space if they're going to do it that way, and not the content, because if people paid for it legitimately, it probably shouldn't exist there. That's just my opinion.
Yeah, that makes sense. When it comes to, I mean, there's no way the question I'm about to ask can be answered. Probably no one knows. Do you think this type? I think if the product placement came, like you said, where Coke came to you and asked you in it, there's probably pretty lucrative options in there. They're probably willing to pay quite a bit for placement in like Half-Life Alyx or something like that. But when it comes to at least what Oculus has hinted at with the clips that they've showed or hints, banner ads like that, is there really any is it lucrative for a developer to even implement that game? So, for instance, I'll call them out. Blaston was going to do it. They pulled back. We can get into that. I don't have any ill will to them. I think they're just doing what they need to do. So we can get into that. But a banner ad in Blaston that's in the arena, is that
Mhm.
lucrative to a developer, or would a better option be not to take 30%? That is targeted. I know you can't speak on Blaston, but in your mind, from what you've seen for advertisers, are banner
Mhm.
ads in remotely any sense going to pay developers what they hope?
I mean, I don't know the full context of what's going on there, so I don't really know what they're offering.
Hmm.
I guess the big fear for me and maybe a lot of other people is that that it doesn't feel like an appropriate model for VR. And I'll tell you why, because it for me it starts leading us down the cell phone road of monetization, adware, freeware games that kind of diminish the value of the products we're making in VR. I I would be very concerned to see freeware game with lots of ads in it in VR. I could see it happening at the
Yes.
same time. This is absolutely probably going to happen, but I just wouldn't want to suddenly see our entire market shift to a freeware market where now you're being bombarded by just absolute garbage and it's got ads in it and then you're killing, I mean, you're potentially driving a big knife into the back of VR by doing that. Like it's a bit like reading the room a little bit. Like VR consumers are essentially PC gamers who are adopting this crazy tech. And PC gamers don't want to be advertised to. That there's a long history there of like, no, I've paid my money. I don't want to be advertised to. That's not to say that there can't be free games that incorporate that in some way.
Do you think
Just as
it's
long as that's separated cleanly,
Do you
right?
think it's the PC gamers don't want to be sold to, and I'll lump just gamers. I'm just gonna say gamers. Do you think gamers don't want ads in their game because they don't want the distraction, or do people just not? And I might be speaking for others. Shouldn't do that, but I am speaking for others. Do you think we just don't want to be sold to 24/7? Is there a time and place that we just need to disassociate with reality, even though it is virtual reality? There is a degree
Yeah.
that I want to dissociate with the world and just focus on what's in front of me. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Yeah, I totally. There's part of that for sure. I think part of it too is just it instantly triggers people to be advertised to if they've already paid for something.
Hmm.
Like it especially in this and VR definitely has a more heavy quality about it that way because you're literally going to a new world, or at least it feels like you've transported elsewhere. And yet to your point, you don't you don't want to be advertised to, especially if you're paid for access to that world, right?
Yes, absolutely. When it comes to let's go to Blaston, and I don't ask you to speak on their behalf or anything. That's unfair to you. One thing that I have defended quite a bit on Twitter whenever I can because I do feel very passionate about it. Um, is review bombing. Um, I don't personally think this situation was a case of review bombing. I think this was a case of something, if it was implemented, people who own the game have every right
Mm,
to change their opinion, their truth, just like everyone. If someone tells me something, their truth is their reality. That is the reality. Doesn't make it right or wrong. It's just that's their reality. From your perspective, if you were to ever enact ads, um, what's the way to go about it that maybe cuts it off where this is a them against you situation? How do you build your community to accept what may come? It may be advantageous for you.
yeah, I think the reaction to Blaston was just based purely on what there's ads, what where there's going to be ads in every single game from now on the Quest. That's where I think that's mainly where the thrust of that sort of panicked review bombing thing came from. It's not because Blaston, from what I saw, I mean, it's an arena sport and there's ads in arenas, so it does contextually it makes sense that they're there. So I wouldn't
And quick
grind their
for the
gears too
record
hard.
too, I don't mean to
Yeah.
cut you off, and I want you to go on with that. But for the record, I think they did an interview today, like, and it's been pretty. It hasn't been pretty known because if it was pretty known, this wouldn't have happened. But for people who follow and pay attention, this was their goal from the start with Blaston to have ads. So
Hmm.
yes, if you didn't know that, it comes as a shock. But it technically was no secret that this was their goal from the start. It just happened to,
Yeah.
unfortunately, not be common knowledge.
It just, it was just, I think it's just people's reaction was a panicked reaction to the mere mention of there being ads in games on
Mm-hmm.
the Oculus Quest platform. Um, again, the way you do it to me is it just has to be appropriate. You get advertised to all the time when you watch TV or Netflix or anything. Like you just don't know you're being advertised to. They hide product placement in the environment. And that's exactly how I think most VR product or ads should really occur. It should be more that I've discovered a thing in this environment and now I'm playing with it and I'm using the computer to get my next clue, but oh, I'm being advertised to because it's a tablet, it's a Samsung tablet or something. Like
Yeah,
that's the way you do it, right?
that makes sense to me. I think many people would agree. I think where the conversation switches, and that's why I wanted to start the conversation just with ads in general, because there's different levels of this discussion. We then move from ads to targeted ads, which is I think where a lot more people start to shy away.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know his name by memory, and I apologize about that because he there. I might try to find it. I'll put it in the video description when this video goes live after this. But I was reading a really well thought out article that was free on a website, so you can read the entire thing for free on what eye tracking, which they have hinted coming to the Oculus Quest Pro, can obtain. I think that's where people get really dicey on the subject. From the developer side, is there anything that, let's say, targeted ads do come, meaning eye tracking is picking up what everyone's putting down? Do developers factor that into their game experience? Are you trying to make it so maybe where ads come into place are less in your face, where the security feels much better, or is this something that you're just trying to figure out as it comes? When it happens, you'll have to target it. That's a lot of questions at once, and I kind of understand that when I said that, but I'm not sure if Facebook's going to give you the option eventually. Is kind of what I'm going at. I'm wondering if this is going to be a must-have eventually.
Oh, I don't think so. I don't. Yeah, I think to assume that this is a every game has to do this going forward is not, that's not true.
Okay.
There's too many variable experiences in games where it just wouldn't make any sense, and it would be so overt and in your face that it would destroy the game. Um, the problem, I guess, is just that you don't want to build a model necessarily that is purely adware, freeware, where you're starting to get, I don't know. There's a parasitic weird thing that happens with phone app games. The whole economy of it is just kind of messed up, and I think it's only like 1% of developers in that space make good money.
Mm.
The rest, I'd have to find the stat again, but it was something ridiculous. Like of all the developers around the world building stuff for this, it's like 1% earn. So you just don't want to replicate that model. It doesn't make sense to me.
It's the common race to the bottom discussion, which I try
Yeah.
to avoid using that term because the second you say race to the bottom, you kind of end discussion. But in a
Yeah.
way, I do understand why they say that. I do get worried.
But like,
Yeah.
again, though, I think Facebook is well within their rights to advertise in their home space,
Hmm.
especially when they're taking a loss on headsets, right? Or at least the rumor is that they're taking a loss on headsets.
I think we know it's
Um,
not a rumor.
yeah, but I think they could find an elegant way to advertise in their home space. If developers want to advertise, like Blaston doing ads that banners that make sense environmentally, I don't know, more power to them. I actually don't have a problem with that. Like if it makes sense for the game, then sure. If on the other hand we're descending into an app phone model, then obviously I'm sure I share the concern with a lot of people about that.
This is again, if you don't even want to put your opinion out there, I respect that because again, it's a question that is about someone else and maybe we're not applied directly to you. Um, but when it comes to the ads themselves, I'm trying to word this the right way so it
Oh
doesn't come
right,
off
eye
the.
tracking. You were talking about eye tracking before. Yeah.
Yeah, that is. I am nervous about that. I'm nervous that the like for those in the chat who don't know, and this is going to be doomsday scenario. So I say this with a grain of salt. Please don't take this as doomsday. This is just what it can do. What it can do, it can be great. Some people will use it poorly. Some will use it great. So take it with a grain of salt. But with eye tracking, they can look at your pupil dilation. They can determine sexual interest. They can determine what you like, what you're looking at. They can determine disease. They literally can know everything biometric about you a lot of times just from pupil dilation. If you say that like that, it's terrifying. But in reality, that may not be how it's used. So I don't like to scare people with that. But I do like what you said about how this will be, in your opinion, opt-in only. Because if that's the case, where it's not going to be mandatory to be had, that comes down to the developers. And if they're
Yeah.
building the right community and they're setting the right precedent from the start, that really shouldn't be an issue, which is one reason why I think Blaston got the short end of the stick, because I haven't been with them for a long time, but they have always been very amicable. They're communicative. They really actually do have a community. So it was sad to see what happened to them, in my opinion.
Yeah, and just to, I don't know the full story there, but yeah, just to back them up a little bit, like it made sense for their game, or it seems like it did in terms of presentation. So they definitely got the short end of the stick with the ire of the community. Like I get why the
Yeah.
community was like, there's a fire, but they didn't totally deserve that.
And one thing too, what I was going to ask, but I will be honest, I was talking because I brain farted on it. When it comes to the games, the test subjects here, I remember someone on Reddit posted a support ticket they put in, and Blaston was listed, Supernatural was listed, and there was a third game which I cannot recall. Um, it's not your place to speculate on this, but if you want to and could, what is the reason we're seeing non-Facebook studio games the brunt of discussion with ads? I would assume that it would have made more sense for Population One, especially with billboards in that game, and Beat Saber. Not saying Beat Saber works specifically, but why Facebook-owned titles don't seem to be the guinea pigs here? I don't like the optics. I'm not saying this is the fact, but I don't like the optics of seeing non-Facebook owned studios seem to have to take the brunt of
Right.
the hate, when I would hope that as a leader, Facebook being a leader, they would lead with their own studios making the charge. I'm a little grossed out by that, I will be honest.
Well, I think it was developer choice though, ultimately. I think they
Hmm.
just put the word out there, and if somebody was interested, they could. Um, yeah, I don't know the answer to that.
There really isn't an answer to it. That's why I was like, I don't need you to speculate on it. But I don't know. I run. You and I were speaking what I do. I have 30 employees at my day job, and I will have to do decisions I don't want to do. I don't have a choice. That is well above my control. But I will always voice to try to be the leader, to do it in house first. I will never make someone do something that I don't want to do myself. Um, and I don't know the ins and outs. It's all behind closed doors. I don't know what the discussions were, the opt in. So I can only speculate for
Mhm.
others, which I shouldn't do. But I do wish I would have seen the first one to take charge, the first one to say something, is someone with skin in the game on Oculus's own platform, their own studio, because I think that would have set a precedent a little better than watching a developer of resolution games put their neck out and take the brunt for something they probably didn't deserve. And I hope Facebook took care of them. I really do.
Well,
I hope they took care of them.
with Blaston especially, I think you mentioned that they had already kind of planned to have some kind of ads in their game, so it
Hmm.
probably just made sense to reach out to them and try an early test of that, right? I'm
Yes.
assuming that's what happened. I just wanted to touch quickly on, how are you for time?
Oh, I'm good. Yeah, I'll be honest, just for the sake of conversation, I was probably gonna end the ad stuff just on my side because I don't want to harp. But go on, man. Anything you
Oh,
want.
just
I got plenty of
yeah,
time.
you mentioned eye tracking. I just want to say there's definitely things swirling around coming down the pipe that are far more um embedded than that. So as a lot of people know who have been following things, there's the whole brain machine interface. And this is basically incorporating that technology into head straps, and for a number of all of the companies are looking at this to different degrees, right? And that's not a secret. But I'm just, if you want to project forward a little bit here,
Hmm.
that's an unstoppable reality of how VR tech is going to evolve. So it's not just eye tracking; it's sensing different areas of your brain for different neural activity and tapping into how you're feeling and thinking in the moment when you're being exposed to different content. So from like a developer standpoint, it's really it's super fascinating because you can tap into those different emotional states and you can drive different things happening at different times. And there's all kinds of crazy metrics you can learn and extract from a person's brain, obviously. And then there's the dark side of that, which is you can do all kinds of nasty stuff, or you can be very targeted in manipulating people to do different things. But um, I'm so I don't want to say I'm a nihilist with this stuff, but it's like you can't stop progress is the big thing. Like you're never going to stop this. It's the same thing with, Elon Musk and doing Neuralink, and like all of that stuff is happening, it's coming, and you're not going to be able to stop it. It's too big. The machine is moving. So you have to be a bit more zen with it, I think. Like go back to the internet. The internet is a great example of a technology that had amazing potential for good and amazing potential for bad. And we've seen it evolve over the years to do both things very well. Right. And there's a whole bunch of gray in between. It's comparable. You have to go back to big technological evolutions. They are unstoppable things, but they have cross benefits. Sometimes it's good, sometimes it's bad. And it's unhelpful to be super black and white about thinking about those things. The Gutenberg press, even if you go back to just printing, the printing press, like same thing, good and bad, good ideas, bad ideas coming out of that evolution of technology. So the brain machine interface, yeah, for sure. And eye tracking, it could track this and that, and it could do all this awful shit, but it could also do a bunch of amazing things. Like, and you mentioned some of them, but being able to detect health issues or early onset Alzheimer's, all these things that's going to ungate, or let paralyzed people play games in a way that they never could before. Like there are some fascinating and truly beneficial things that would come out of that technology. So I always get a bit pissed off when I get into conversations with people that are super just, no, it's all negative. And we've seen so much of that in the last year. No, it's in the middle is the truth of it, right?
And I hope to see that negativity kind of slow down. I think this kind of negativity that's kind of been spiking lately is mostly due, and I'll take part to blame to this. It's the enthusiast market realizing it's not the same market that they jumped into anymore. It's changing, and the personable attitude of virtual reality, the free roaming attitude, the anything is possible, and we're gonna do whatever we want. It's still possible, but it's changing. We are getting more corporatized, and that word is negative in most terms. I don't mean that a corporate entity is dictating what you do, but this Wild West is becoming a little more tamed in a way.
So are you worried we're sliding into Ready Player One, basically? Is
No,
that the concern?
I'm not going to go that far. I think if I'm comparing it to where I started with VR to my notions that I grew to love and what I was introduced to, if you just compare that to what it is now, you could slip really quickly into that mindset. But that's only if you just focus on the vocal majority. If we kind of take a step back and look at the nuance, the gray area, I don't know. I'm pretty optimistic. I would personally like to see, you know, this is a tough subject. It's hard. I'd like to see Facebook tone it down. I'm a little nervous of where things are going. That's fair. I think if anyone says they're not nervous, um, you're lying to yourself. And not just Facebook, but in life, you should always be cautious. You should never take everything at face value. You should question. But if you're questioning into absurdity of just negativity, that's your fault. I don't go that route, but I do have genuine concerns that Zuckerberg understands that VR, XR could be the next computing platform. I think it could. I don't want it to be controlled by one person. But
Well,
for
it's not going to be. Like
Mhm.
I'll say that right now because the thing we haven't talked about is AR, and
Yes.
the significant breakthrough of AR over the next few years is probably the version of AR that lets you do both things. You have pass through the VR. It's a mode switch essentially. It does both things. And the big disruptor in that industry could still be Apple. And Apple has different a different approach to market than Facebook does. So I think those two companies are going to compete pretty heavily in the not too long from now future. But it's going to take two entities of that size to even bother competing, right?
Yes.
But I think that's great because they'll both kind of hopefully tone each other down in different ways, because they have to stay hyper consumer friendly the whole way, right? So yeah, it'll be interesting.
Yeah, and I appreciate the people on both sides. Like for instance, people in the chat like Skiva, he's very, very outspoken anti-Facebook, and I don't mean that negatively, Skiva. Like, I'm not putting you on blast here, but there are people who are going to be the vocal people who are super anti, and while some people who are super for the I'm going to go the opposite, the bootlickers, like the real bad, they both have value. Yes, they might both be blinded, and I'm not saying Skeevy you're blinded, by the way. One side might be blinded to the other, but in that blindness, there are questions that come up that the middle is going to pick up and will lead to good things. Like this eye tracking debate. Yeah, the vocal, part of the vocal on the extreme of it's the worst thing in the world. I know like Six is very nervous about it. Where I'll use Six and Ryan because I talked with them. I know Ryan's more on the eye tracking value side. Six is more on the eye tracking possible repercussion side. But within that discussion, that's where we find some possibilities that work for everybody. But I am on board with eye tracking. If it can diagnose dementia, Alzheimer's, all these things, which there's been studies that it has. Think of that. If you're playing games at 30, I'm 31. If I'm playing games at 31, and there's any hint that I could catch any possible stuff at 32, for all the negatives that maybe someone goes into, think of all the life I may have back. Value life, not just living to old age at 90, but living healthy and living, being able to do what I want because I caught something early on. I'm open to that because a healthy life in old age is invaluable. I can do so much good. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yes, totally. What you just said though about the kind of two extremes, the outspoken against Facebook, outspoken for Facebook. What I find really interesting is more like what's gonna. Again, I think AR is going to be a massive disruptor to the VR industry, and I think that is going to happen before there is a major competitor to the Quest.
Oh wow.
Like
Okay.
so like you just have to break it down logically. Who can compete with Facebook on the economics of hardware? Like
Apple.
who? Apple, but they're not focused on VR. Apple's focused on AR, XR. They're releasing a VR headset, but it's really the intent of it is to develop for AR, so that when their AR device comes out, there's a suite of stuff to do there, right? So who beyond Apple can compete with Facebook in the next 5 years? And everybody I've talked to in the industry, there really just isn't anybody. Microsoft is not focused on VR. That they've pivoted to AR. It's not in their playbook, apparently. So who? There is the answer is there is no one. So it's just interesting that so you've got the kind of diehards in VR that are like, I hate Facebook and they do this and that and everything's shitty and the future's bleak and awful. But I guess the question I would bounce back is like, okay, but that's what it's going to be until AR becomes a thing. Like that's kind of the reality. And AR, the problem with AR is that it's still like a 10-year cycle until we see AR doing the magical thing everybody expects it to do. So I think we're stuck with the way the market is right now for a very long time.
Yes.
And so all we can do as VR enthusiasts is move within what's working and try to make that as good as we can. And we can absolutely bring up concerns and we can absolutely try to push the market here or there. And I think I would love to see all of these companies working more closely together. It's unlikely to happen, but I think developers, consumers, we all have a voice, but just recognize what the market, what it is, who really is holding the keys and who isn't, because that's just the reality of the thing, right? So we can all get super pissed off that XYZ is holding the keys, but what are you going to do about it? I don't know. You could just leave VR. I've had this conversation with a few developers before. They're just so annoyed that is the way the market is, but they don't yet they're unwilling to leave the market. Like that is kind of the answer. Like if you hate the market the way it is, then maybe don't be in the, go make 2D games. I don't know.
No, I think no, seriously, I think that's entirely fair because you see some people complain nonstop. What's the answer? You can leave, but they don't. And I actually take that as a net positive on why they understand. I've made the comment before. You're buying into penny stocks right now, and it's going to be penny stocks for a long time. Um, but what it will be could be huge. I do just for time's sake. I've noticed that in my last few streams, I really enjoyed at the end, even though you've probably had plenty of time to say a lot in your mind, but I'd like to give the floor to you at the end here. Any topic that you wanted to talk about or anything you just want to pitch to people in the chat to try to put. It's easier to say things than it is to type on Twitter. It's easier to do that than an AMA on Reddit. Is there anything in VR, XR, anything that you want the chat to know about to get them thinking about that we can end this on?
Uh,
I like
I
putting
had
people on the
nothing
spot
prepared.
too. I know, that's the fun
Um,
part about it.
I don't know. I guess because most of the kind of interaction that happens is on Twitter. Like that's mostly where I kind of get the like you do get the vibe of the VR market, the enthusiast market, and there is a tremendous amount of angst around things. I want to say that things are definitely getting better. I also want to say there are things happening and coming to market from all these different companies that are absolutely fantastic. It's not just Facebook, it's not just Oculus. All of them are doing really incredible things, which could pivot the market in different weird ways. We just don't know. And I think it's an important thing to talk about. That I have a lot of optimism for VR. VR to me is just starting to explode, and it's not going to be just one company or the other. Everybody's doing different work in important ways, and it's going to eventually lead to kind of the alpha product, the great thing we all want it to be over time. But we still have this road. When I was a bit naive when I got into this 8 years ago, thinking, well, over the next 5 years, this is going to explode. And then it was, okay, maybe it's over the next 10 years, is going to explode. It's starting to explode now, but I think the technology is really going to peak over the next 10 years. um, but and to go easy on all of the companies that are actually making these things, because man, they work hard. And talking to the people is very different from talking to a corporation.
Yes.
So talking to the people at Oculus, or talking to the people at Valve, or talking to the people at HTC or Sony, these are just people trying to do the best work that they can, and there are different tendrils and different concerns trying to push them here or there, but the people making the actual VR stuff, the actual hardware, good fucking people. Like
Yes. Mm-hmm.
these are good people that really are passionate about bringing VR to market, and we have them to thank for so much of what we specifically at Cloud have so much to thank, just because we get to do what we do. We have the coolest job on the planet. And I'm always excited about what new hardware is coming out and what new content is coming out. And the content side, I think we're in this weird transitional phase, like I said before, where I really actually think, resources will ungate for people, for different studios, for different reasons. And I think good things are coming. I think it's the market is going in the right direction.
I would agree with all of that. Everybody, again, if you joined late, Denny is the CEO, the CEO of Cloudhead Games. You know them for Pistol Whip, After Hand Labs, the Gallery games. Denny, thank you for joining tonight. These mean a lot to me. Like I'm gonna preach here for a second. These conversations mean quite a bit to me, guys. You get little tidbits on Twitter, you get tidbits on YouTube, but a lot of times the whole point of this series, the whole point of this entire thing, and Denny and I talked about this pre-stream, there's no black and white. I see comments on Twitter, and I've been guilty of them myself. And I'm doing my best to stop. VR is young. I think the last 3 people we've talked about on stream have all said we're not getting to where we want for 10 plus years. Be patient, be the advocate for change that you want to see, but understand that everyone has different thoughts. But either way, I'll end it there because I could preach forever. Denny, thank you again for joining. Everyone in the
Thanks,
chat,
Eric.
thank you for being productive in this chat. There's been a lot of good discussion in there, and I think you all are very respectful of each other. But that's going to be it for today. We've got two streams coming that I think y'all will want to see. If you want clips from any of these streams, they'll be on the second channel. Link will be in the video description, and I've been putting it in the chat. But on Thursday, we will have someone making their own VR headset. I think it's going to be very interesting to talk to him. And on Saturday, someone who's doing sense or phantom sense in VR, where you can feel pain, heat, cold. We'll be talking to them and experiencing that as well. So I'll see you then. As always, guys, take it easy. See you next time, Space Cowboys. Peace.